Hi, how you doing? My aging gardener's back is currently recovering from spinal surgery, and I thought I'd share some of my thoughts about that with you. My name is Sharon. I garden on a large yard in a small town in east central Saskatchewan, Zone 3. Welcome to my Sask Garden. I've been gardening in some form for about 45 years, and on this large yard since 1997. And I've been dealing with a bad back for probably the last 20 years. I don't think gardening necessarily caused the issues. Moving incorrectly and putting myself into the gardening in incorrect positions probably would be more the culprit. There were a few really bad bits through the years when it spasmed and I was barely able to move. Most of those times came along with like an aha moment where I said, oh, that's really going to hurt. And, it was often the simplest of movements, because big movements you tend to think about before you do them. But something like putting on your socks, you just don't expect that to put you over the edge. But in 2021, I had a bad bout of nerve pain down my left leg, which took a long time to go away. But, with some drugs and some care and some physio, it eventually did. Then this past July, it raised its ugly head once again. And after only a few hours of pretty severe leg pain, I landed up with a numb foot and the inability to raise my foot and my toes to walk. And that's called foot drop or drop foot. And it seems that the nerve that controls all that motion just isn't firing. It turns out that the problem is degenerative, and it was not any one particular thing I did or lifted that day in July. It probably was not trying to get my shovel into the dry, compacted soil to dig holes to replant my daylilies. It probably wasn't yanking too hard on stubborn roots that just didn't want to come loose. Really, it was all cumulative because I just overdid it. And if it wasn't that day, it would have been the next. Honestly, at this point, it was just waiting to happen without much warning. But that sudden onset of the foot drop in July did set off my having to get my first ever lumbar MRI that quickly led me to seeing a neurologist and then ultimately a neurological surgeon who explained to me the issues of my spine, particularly the severe stenosis or the narrowing at the L4, L5 area in the spine. Basically, there was no room left for my nerves, and the neurosurgeon said it was like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. Something's got to give. And then, quick as a wink, I had spinal decompression surgery. That was 3 weeks ago now, and I think my recovery is going really well so far. Thankfully, this is the time of year when I'm not tempted to garden or work harder than I should, and I have several months to heal. At the moment, and actually since I had the surgery, I am in very little pain. I only needed pain medication, or took pain medication for just a few days, and discovered that I was fine without any pain medication at all. Everything is healing well, and I wish I had known going in what it was going to be like coming out, because I would have been under a lot less stress going into the surgery had I known then what I know now. So of course this problem was on my mind most of the summer as I still tried to get gardening done and get around with the foot drop, which I knew was stemming from a pinched nerve and probably in my back. At that point, I had not yet had the MRI. I had a very weak leg and some thigh pain, as well as the foot drop. Thankfully, during all that time, I had virtually no back pain, but I was still quite afraid of aggravating the problem even more, which was somewhat difficult because I did not have any pain to guide me, to stop me from doing something. Anyways, long story short, now post-surgery, as I said, all is going well, but I am thinking a lot about how I can modify what I'm doing so that I can continue gardening without doing any further damage to my spine. When we think about what we could get done in a day 20 years ago compared to today, you know, for me, needless to say, that is substantially less now. I don't know, could you still do in a day, could any of us still do in a day what we did 20 years ago? If you can, kudos to you. I know that I cannot. But I'm not just physically slowing down. I've also been thinking differently. The past number of years, I've been working at it quite naturally without even knowing it or consciously thinking about it. Over the past number of years, I have been adopting the trend to slow gardening, or back to nature gardening, healthy ecosystem gardening. To me, that means not stressing over every weed or the placement of every plant, and it means not removing every leaf and stem. It's letting go of perfection. It's acceptance, because most of that does lead to healthy ecosystem where plants and bugs and birds are all quite happy in the yard. It's far from perfect, but I am becoming more and more okay with that. There is a growing trend now towards slow living that encourages savoring the simple activities. It prioritizes peace over speed, enjoying the moment. It lets go of hustling, of multitasking, and that constant pressure of being productive. Not rushing from one thing to the next, not being exhausted. Slow living is an antidote to that stress and anxiety often prevalent in today's modern lifestyle. It allows you to breathe. It's not outwardly productive at all, but inwardly it's very calming. Another growing trend is slow travel. I'm sure you've heard of it. The core principles of that include quality over quantity and a slower, unstructured pace. It allows you to be present and to breathe. It lets you wander, observe, and take it in instead of rushing from one crowded tourist spot to the next. Slow, mindful gardening has those same core principles, really, that have always been there, and some of us just tend to let them go. This overall trend towards slow gardening is interesting. I came across a quote by one of my favorite gardeners, Monty Don, who says, "Slow gardening is subtle and considerate, gently steering and nurturing the garden rather than bullying it into some sort of chorus line display." Slow gardening. You know, for me, I enjoy just being outside in the yard, and if it takes me a long time to get a task done, well then so be it. My joy is actually in the task, and I'm grateful that I have the ability to still do it in whatever manner that entails. If I can't get to those weeds pulled today for whatever reason, well, I'm sure they'll be there tomorrow. Peace over speed. Letting go of the pressure to be productive, not rushing from one spot to the next. Social media is a blessing and a curse. It has definitely put some pressures on us to get this done or that done now. Plant this now. Do this to your soil now. We are absolutely bombarded with too much information, along with incredibly beautiful garden photos that a gardener naturally wants to emulate. Every year, there are more and more new perennials to try, new annuals to fill too many pots and baskets, then keep them alive and thriving through the season, probably with fertilizer or other soil additives. And then getting rid of bugs and critters. That's another product. Overconsumerism is alive and well in the garden, and I think so much that we often fail to notice the beauty of that one plant or flower that we already have, or savor the taste of that one delicious vegetable that we're already growing. Letting that little bug live on that fallen stem, because neither of them are doing any harm. Slow living, slow gardening. Going forward, I am not yet certain how this looks for me when it comes to gardening, and honestly, time will tell. What I do know right now is that I have to listen to my body and listen to what my back is telling me. And right now, that means changes in how I do things and how I think. It's very hard for me to stop for the day when there are still many tasks yet to be done. I have that inner stress to always be productive. And if I can multitask, even better. I always feel like there's one more weed I can pull or one more branch I can cut, thinking I'll just finish this next task and then I'll take a break. It's just me. I have no other pressure to get it done other than myself. When I worked, it was how I did my job. My very normal or natural way of thinking is don't put off for tomorrow what you can get done today. So I push myself physically in the garden, and that needs to stop. And, you know, I need to slow down even more and take more frequent breaks. I need to sit down and relax for a while, enjoy the view, maybe think about a better way to do something, or ask for help, or I can turn a blind eye. That spiral of just one more leads me to overdoing it. When you overdo it, your back starts to get tired and you start making mistakes. I need my gardening to become a series of small, manageable visits rather than a full-on marathon. Those days need to be done. Maybe it's going to be a 15 or 30-minute task, then take a break, then move on to a different type of task like standing instead of kneeling. I don't find vegetable garden the way I have it set up. I don't find it particularly physically demanding. My veg garden isn't big, and because of the way the raised beds are set up, I can kneel most of the time for any work that needs to be done. Those long kneeling pads I have make it easy to move along the bed without having to constantly get up because I kind of hopscotch one over the other. If I can't kneel, or if it's easier, I have about an 8-inch stool, and I kind of sit squat on that small stool. It's also really light and easy to move around. The soil in the raised beds is always fairly loose or easily loosened. Weeding isn't much or too difficult. I utilize a lot of mulch, so that's helpful. Harvesting is generally not too bad. I don't do a marathon of getting it all seeded and transplanted in one day. I actually work at it over about a month, starting with potatoes in early May and ending with tomatoes and squash in early June. What can get difficult is processing too much produce, so keeping myself in check, growing just enough and not anything more than that, particularly not anything that requires a lot of work or maintenance through the growing season. But overall, for me and my back and the way I have it now, I think that the veg garden is quite manageable. It's where I spend a lot of time, and it is where I tend to slow garden the most. I've, been thinking about what is most difficult on my back, and I have some problem areas that are probably the most difficult. They tend to be areas that I avoid until I have to deal with it, which makes it even harder. One area has problem soil and also is inundated with thistle, and another has quackgrass. That's another area, has quackgrass that's constantly invading. Both those areas coincidentally have iris that are plants that need frequent division, and I can tell you if quackgrass is going to invade anything, it's going to invade bearded iris. These are areas that I'm going to have to think about making easier on myself in some way. Speaking of iris and their need for frequent division, digging, dividing, and replanting perennials is one task that I've never really enjoyed very much, and most of the time I find it quite physically challenging. The lifting of the perennial can be really heavy. Dividing with a sharp spade still means sharp thrusts with your leg and kind of putting your back into it, so I need to minimize that. The answer may be going more to slow-growing perennials that don't need frequent dividing, or perhaps some long-blooming shrubs will be easier. Once again, spirea shrubs come to mind. They are just that. They bloom for a long time, they're long-lived, they're relatively easy maintenance with a once-a-year trim. They come in many sizes and colors, and they have little in the way of pest issues. They're great little shrubs. Lifting and carrying is a big one for me. For one, I like to hand water with rainwater. I used to use a big watering can. I think it was 10 or 12 liters, but I moved to a smaller one that is 6 liters. 6 liters is 6 kilos, which is 13 pounds. Many trips carrying that weight is probably still not great for me, and I know that, so I have to modify that task some. We're adding even more drip line to the veg garden this coming summer, so most of those beds will simply be attaching a hose to the drip system. I'll fertilize with slow release granular instead of a water soluble, and I'll utilize more mulch. Also, hard on the back is bending, and for me, bending is a no-no, full stop. If there's room, I need to kneel. I have a kneeler, but in tight spots, there isn't always room. It also raises me up a few inches, and then I have to pitch forward even more. I don't really find kneeling on the kneeler to be the best. It is great for helping me get up and down. So when I don't kneel, I squat, but the challenge there is getting up and down, or getting up anyway. So I like to have my little shovel with me because that I can use that to help me rise up again. And of course, bending, twisting, and lifting all at the same time is a recipe for disaster for me. I don't tend to do it all that often, but I do catch myself sometimes, and so I have to be more cognizant of that. Pulling for me is hard on the back. I have a lot of weedy tree pressure, and first-year growth is usually fairly easy to pull, but beyond that, they're tough with long, stubborn roots. Last year, I started carrying in my arsenal a small container, just a yogurt container of Roundup, and I keep a small sponge brush in there. So now I cut the sapling and I give that cut end a swipe with that brush. But if I don't have that close by, I do tend to try and dig and pull that sapling. Going out prepared is helpful, and having my wagon filled with everything that I may need is definitely helpful. That half bend that we do, or that I do, is hard. For me, it tends to be something at about thigh height or so, like planting up my big driveway pots or leaning over the wheelbarrow. Last year, I used my kneeler, which doubles as a stool, and I sat down to plant the pots. I also knelt down at some of them, and that was way easier. That kneeler is fairly light and pretty easy to move around, so I do need to utilize that more. Last year I bought a little red wagon. It's fabulous. It's plastic. It's easy to pull around over rocks. It's easy to pull around over the grass. It has a dumping function, which I like. Before the wagon, I used my steel cart, which is also great, but it's heavier. And then when I loaded it up, it was heavier. It was even heavier yet. I really love this little red wagon. I load it up with whatever I'm going to need instead of carrying a tool bucket or something to carry the tools in. I throw everything in the red wagon, as well as plants or anything like that, a watering can perhaps, and I just load it up and I take it to whatever area of the yard I'm going to be working in, and I have it all there with me, and that red wagon is going to be very helpful going forward. And of course, there is accepting help. I know it's a fault of mine that I want to do it all myself. But you know, Andy has always been ready to help wherever he can. And he can handle the heavy watering cans and the physically hard work, carrying and lifting and digging. I just need to ask, and I need to do that instead of just saying, oh, I can get this done myself. My hope, my goal is to age gracefully in the garden. And this may entail looking at the yard and garden as a partner and not as a project. I don't know, can I learn to look at the garden not as something that I want to tame or conquer, but rather as a living entity that I collaborate with, not bully it? I mean, a garden has its own pace. Some years it flourishes, other years it struggles, just like people. Probably 20 years ago, I gave up trying to grow plants that like acidic soil because they struggle in my yard and they were never healthy. I can't grow healthy roses because they don't like my soil. I tried and struggled and poured on additives and, tried to amend the soil, and ultimately I dug out those that didn't die. Blueberries in my yard would never thrive. They like acidic soil, and I know they won't thrive for me. There are so many beautiful plants that will thrive or that do thrive in my soil. And so I have to ask myself, is it really necessary to work so hard at growing others that don't? I think not. Here's something else I read recently, and that is to focus on the senses. Spend time in the garden, not working. Sit with a cup of tea and just listen to the birds and the bees. Smell the soil after a rain. Touch the textures of the leaves. See the intricacies of that delicate flower. Maybe give it a sniff. This is the heart of mindful gardening, and it provides immense therapeutic value without any physical strain. Really, it should be what we're all trying to achieve in the garden. This is the beginning of my adaptive journey. Slow living and slow gardening, maybe with some slow travel thrown in. It's time for me to celebrate the good enough garden. I might even look for a garden sign that says that. Like I said, it's been happening anyway, but I need to normalize it more. The pressure for perfection is a primary source of physical stress. Shrugging off that imperfection is much easier. I need to invest in this mindset to save my physical self so that I can keep investing time in the garden. We are all at different levels of physical ability, but one thing is certain, it does get somewhat harder as we age. Embracing the change to sustainable gardening practice can mean finding joy in the garden at any age. So anyways, that's it in a nutshell. I thought I'd bring you up to speed on what's been going on with me and why you haven't seen me for a few weeks. I just thought I would take some time to let my body heal, and going into it, I wasn't sure what it was going to be like on the other side. So happy to say that that all that is not too bad, and I should be back at it in no time. Thanks for taking the time watching the video today. I do appreciate it. I hope you're doing well. See you soon.